Welcome, everyone. My name is Bruce Belzowski. I'm the Managing Director of the Automotive Futures Group here in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I'm here today with Tommaso Pardi, who's the Director of GERPISA, which is a global network of researchers studying the automotive industry. It's based in Paris. There are over 2,500 people who are connected to GERPISA on the internet on their website, as well as about 100 or so core researchers throughout the world, primarily academics who are studying the auto industry. And when I could probably argue there's historical stuff, but there's a lot of stuff about the current and the future automotive industry. Tommaso's been with GERPISA he's been part leadership or full leadership for 15 years now. So he's the longest serving director of GERPISA. And we're glad to have him here today to talk about the most recent GERPISA conference that was in Paris in June, and the takeaways about what he saw from the presentations, from the side comments, from the discussions that people had at the conference, and particularly about what was going on in the EU. This is one of our core parts of our EV Evolutions research program, where we study the effects of EVs on the U.S., the EU, and China. And EVs obviously play a big role now. What's going on in the EU? So we're looking at policies, technologies, and company strategies. So for this year's GERPISA, I think there were about 70 papers that were presented at the conference, as well as colloquiums on the side that took place. Tommaso, welcome.
Thank you very much, Bruce. Thank you for the introduction. I'm happy to be here.
When you look at what happened over the last, now you've had about a month now to kind of think about everything that happened during the GERPISA conference in June. What were some of your key takeaways? I know there was a lot that was discussed.
Yes, we had a lot of discussion. We had this plenary about the Industrial Accelerator Act, which is a key piece of legislation that wants to introduce Made in Europe clause for the automotive sector. And we had a representative of the European Commission, of the industry, both from OEM side. We had Jean-André Barbosa, who is a senior public officer for public affairs in Renault, and that was very interesting, in my opinion, this exchange, because we've seen how much the industry, the suppliers on the one hand, and the car makers do not agree on this. And also the kind of progress the European Commission has made, because introducing Made in Europe clause in Europe was not easy. There was a lot of resistance, both in terms of doctrine and in terms of interest. Particularly Germany wants to keep the European single market as open as possible because it's the biggest exporter of both cars and parts. And so that was very interesting. And we had also a couple of parallel sessions on that, in which we really went into the detail of what is the Industrial Accelerator Act, why it's not yet what is supposed to be if we want really to meet the Chinese challenge, but also the fact that it is a piece of legislation that has never been done before in Europe, because Europe has been very anti-protectionist, very pro-globalization, very pro-free trade, very WTO compatible. So this is a big break and can have important implication for the European automotive industry. So that is my first takeaway, that this is a big topic and that the conference was a very interesting venue to see both stakeholders' point of view and update research on that. So that was very interesting. Then we had
Is that similar to the IRA in the US?
No, it's not similar in the sense the IRA is much more ambitious in the sense that it doesn't only introduce made in US clause for the old battery value chain, but also provided huge credits to actually make in the US
Mm-hmm.
both the raw materials to refine them, and then the batteries, and then
Mm-hmm.
to support the sale. So it was a whole package. It was a full industrial policy. Now,
Mm-hmm.
this in Europe is very difficult to put together. So we have very different pieces of legislation, each bringing something to the table. And so this is just the made in EU provision. So you create a label, you define what is the level of made in Europe content you would like to have. If you want, it would be more similar to the USMCA free trade agreement.
Okay.
Because you
Okay.
see, there is a big difference. You have a free trade zone, so you can introduce local content requirements. It is
Mm-hmm.
WTO compatible because it's a
Mm-hmm.
free trade zone. Well,
Yeah.
actually, Europe is a custom union, so it has common frontiers. So there is the single market is shared by all the countries. So in
Mm-hmm.
theory, you cannot introduce local content rules because it's like a single country. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
you cannot do that if you want to be WTO compatible in the United States. You cannot
Mm-hmm.
say, a car sold in the US must have this level of local content. You can say that the car that crossed the borders between US, Mexico, and Canada and wants to be free trade needs to have a certain level of local content. That's you can do it, but you
Mm-hmm.
cannot say it just about one country. And Europe
Mm-hmm.
is like one country. So that's
Yeah.
why it was more difficult to introduce this local content. And now these made in Europe clause make it possible. And so that is the kind of breakthrough. But it's not a full industrial policies as the IRA was.
Okay.
So my second takeaway is about the battery. So battery industry has been developing fast. If you think back 10 years ago, we know nothing about battery in cars. We have no idea where the big players, the industry was not structured. So in the last 10 years, there's been a lot of going on with of course, big development in China, Korean and Japanese players still keeping a role, but on the smaller side than the big Chinese players like Seattle or BYD. And then we have development of gigafactories in Europe and United States. And we see now that there is a significant number of research on this, both on the development of this in terms of what business model, what is the viability for European actors. We have few startups, some have failed, Northvolt, some are still alive, ACC or Vercor. And so we had interesting presentation about these different case studies and to understand why Northvolt has failed, how ACC is doing, what is the type of development for kind of really made in you battery value chain. Also some analysis about working and employment condition in this industry and general perspective on the transition of work and employment. Why when we move from ICE powertrain to electric powertrain with batteries, what happens to skills, workers, employment, contracts, wages, all these kind of things. So this has become important in the colloquium, was not the case even 3 years ago. So this is something new, and we have learned a lot about the difficulties of scaling up this kind of business in Europe, the need for protection and for active industrial policies to support that. And overall, the fact that working conditions are not there yet at the same level as they were in, or there still are in the powertrain industry. So these some of the takeaways about this.
Now, when we
Um,
and we also visited a battery plant.
Yes, we did. We did have the opportunity to visit a cells plant because sometimes you visit the packaging of cells, so you visit how battery are assembled in the cars. This is happen quite often, but to visit a cells plant, at least from my own experience, that was the first time, and it was quite impressive. Is AAC, which is a Chinese-owned, former still Japanese battery company that has started with Nissan and actually make the cells for both Nissan in the UK and Renault in Douai, which so we also visit the Renault factory in Douai, which makes all the three main electric models for the brand,
Mm-hmm.
which have been quite successful. And it's true that visiting a cells factory is quite impressive. It's really like a cathedral. It is huge. There's a lot of technology, not so many workers. And so that's that. And also we had the opportunity to talk with the manager, the Japanese manager of the Gigafactory, and we learned a lot about scaling up, the difficulties of reaching good level of low scraps, the cooperation with Chinese engineers that is
Mhm.
going on in the company, but they managed to make it. I would say to learn from them, because in some other French companies there is this problem that you have Chinese engineers, they come over, they regulate machines, they fix things or whatever, and they go away, and you have learned nothing. Also because
Mhm.
there is the language barrier, so there is no, and so this has been a problem in ACC, for example. But we in ACC doesn't seem to be a problem. Also, they have their own Japanese engineers, they have uh, that knowledge, but also explain why it's so complicated. Also to reproduce capacity transplant, it takes time before it really is up at the same speed than the mother plant. And so that was very interesting, and we learned a lot. So battery industry is now part of, I would say, the GERPISA core. I mean, we do have a lot of researchers actively working on that, which is very good news for the network because
Now,
I
for the AESC plant, the thing that struck me, I thought, was the materials, or I think, were still coming from China.
Yes, okay. This is for me was a known fact. There is no refinery in Europe, so basically, even if, for instance, we don't do it yet, but there are plans to extract lithium, but we
Mhm.
will still need to send the lithium to China to refine it and then to import it back in order to use it. So yes, there is a big problem of capacity of refining raw materials. So which means that all the raw materials come from China, all the machines that are used in the gigafactories come from China, all the technology. And
Mhm.
so when you're serious about making a sovereignty kind of a battery electric supply chain, this is a huge industrial project. You need refining of raw materials, access to raw materials. Then you need to make anodes and cathodes. We don't do that in Europe to enrich the materials. And then you need some machine tools that are made in Europe. Otherwise, you are dependent on technology and fine
Mhm.
tuning from China. So yes, for the time being, Europe has some gigafactories, but it's really the top of the icebergs, and the rest of the supply chain is completely Asian. Of course, you can, as the US have done, you can also rely on Korean and Japanese
Mhm.
to supply
Yeah.
that because they have the
Mhm.
full supply chain.
Yeah.
But currently, the most competitive are Chinese,
Mhm.
and European OEMs are kind of, I mean, they tried initially to build these European supply chain, at least the top. They realized that it was very difficult, in particular scaling up the manufacturing process, extremely
Mhm.
difficult. And now they are relying
Especially
more and more.
without the central government of the EU supporting it, right?
Yes,
Without,
there were no protections in terms of trade barriers or trade
yeah,
policies. Subsidies were low relatively to the task.
yeah,
And so, for instance, when Northvolt started to have problems, nobody came over to say, okay, we'll lend you more money. We'll
yeah,
figure
yeah,
out what's wrong
yeah.
and we keep you working because you are the biggest
Mhm.
startup for European battery manufacturing. And no, they let the Northvolt go bankrupt, which I think tells a lot about the lack of an orchestrating power. The European Union is represent 27 different states with their own interests, and the European Commission is not really a full government. For its budget depends on the money that comes from the states. For the decision, it depends on the agreement of the council, where you have all the prime minister of all the different states. So that makes extremely difficult to have fast, active decision making about this kind of decision, and also centralized planning of resources to develop new technologies. Europe is working on that, is trying to build that. But there is a big question. Does it have the institutional power to do that? Not just the political power, just the institution have not been made to take these type of decisions, to,
Mhm.
to really build new industries, to coordinate trade and industrial policies. The union does not have fiscal authority. You know,
Hmm.
all
Hmm.
the taxes, all the fiscal measures are still in the control of the 27 and can be different from a state to another. So that the task that the European Union has in front of itself is so big and the means institutionally are relatively weak. So this is a big handicap by comparison with the United States or China, has
Hmm.
been heavily discussed in Europe that perhaps we need a new treaty, perhaps we need really to change the institutional setting,
Hmm.
but there is no consensus about that. So we're kind of stuck in the middle.
And the
Uh,
EU is really relatively new.
It was created in nine. I mean, the act that created the union is 1986, but then it
Mm.
really was put into place in 1991, and since then has not changed very much. The core of the European Union is the single market, is about competition, is about coordinating competition with some social clauses and some social protection. But this is, everything that is about workers, there is about healthcare, which is about fiscal policy or industrial policies, remains in the hands of the states. And
Hmm.
here you can see that we need a European government to that. Otherwise you have things like Northvolt, that goes bankrupt in Sweden. Sweden has no the means to support it, and then the biggest European actor is gone. And so yes, we do have some problem of I would say governance, or how do you articulate existing European institution with tasks that by their magnitude has never been seen before. I think the
Mm.
Chinese challenge is much bigger than the Japanese one or the Korean one. I mean, there is
Well,
no
that's
comparison.
a good point. We'll go back to that in a little bit, but the Chinese issue was always an interesting one in China. I mean, in the EU. I always compare the EU to the US of the carrot and stick, whereas EU uses the carrot to try to bring China along, and the US uses the stick and
Yeah,
of keeping them out. And whereas the EU has been more willing to allow them to come in, even though they use taxes on them, tariffs on them for bringing vehicles in. How's that
I
been
don't
playing
think that
out
was
in the short term?
Yeah, but I don't think that was a really a coordinated, well thought approach. Generally, Europe was very keen in having FDIs from all around the world. They
Hmm.
didn't put too much barriers to that. There are, of course, you need to comply with the European rules and institutions, but you set up a factory in Hungary, as many Chinese companies have done. The context is very favorable to business, and so this has been, business as usual. While I think that you should have needed to set up a specific approach to China from the beginning of the electrification, realizing that otherwise you would end up in the current situation, which is that Chinese brands are basically doubling their market share every 6 months. This is what has been going on in the last 18 months. So from 3 to 6 to 6 to 12, and they keep growing. And now perhaps it's already too late because there are already factories which are working in Europe. There's a lot of joint ventures and cooperation between European companies and Chinese companies. And so Europe is realizing that they should have put the stick much earlier, and now it's difficult to put it after that most of many things have already happened. So I think that the United States were right about doing that because they realized that China is not Japan, it's not Korea, it doesn't have the same ambition, doesn't have the same means, it doesn't have the same speed. And the Chinese challenge is bigger, faster, uh, is built on the top on a technological revolution in which they're ahead. So it's not just about cheaper cars or good quality cars. It's about electric cars that are better, software-defined vehicles that are better and cheaper, and by
Hmm.
far. And that is it goes through all the value chain. So it's an existential threat to several industries in Europe. And it's like we have realized that the last 2 years. And what actually was clear in the United States since I guess 2015, 2014, it was clear that there was a need to put barriers and to limit the trade expansion of China early on. And
Hmm.
so we are 10
Hmm.
years late. So I think that that the carrots are not good at all. And you're right, there are a lot of carrots because states that have automotive industry are now losing a lot of factories and employment due to the current crisis and Chinese trade penetration. And there are a lot of Chinese actors that are willing to take over empty factories. And when they
Hmm.
do, they receive bonuses, they receive free land, they receive tax exemptions.
Hmm.
So we are in a situation in which it's urgent to react. And that is all the debate about the Industrial Accelerator Act that we had in the colloquium that is going on in Brussels is about that.
So
So,
we also had a good discussion about, and you brought it up, the difference between Japan coming to the EU or Japan coming to the US, and also the what's it, VRA, the
yeah, the
voluntary,
voluntary export restraint or something like
yeah,
that. Yeah.
restraint, yeah, agreement that in the US, I think said that the Japanese overall would not have more than 30% of take 30% of the market. I don't know how they manage that because it's independent companies, but that was the agreement. And
Yeah,
then
because Japanese companies were willing to engage and Japanese government was willing to engage into that because this is a state which is a friend, which is under the
yeah.
United States umbrella, which is an ally. And
Mhm.
so when there were trade frictions, they went until a certain point, and when politicians raised the voice, the Japanese say, okay, let's reevaluate the yen, the
Yeah.
Plaza agreement. Okay, we will invest in the United States.
Yeah.
Let us test, but we do it, and we will create full factories, and we will bring local content. And when there was this voluntary restraint agreement on imports, say, okay, let's agree, which was a gray zone of WTO. So
Mhm.
basically, was never written in clear trade agreements, not like a tariff. It's a
Mhm.
state that says, okay, I will monitor my exports and so on. So of course you could do that with China, with Japan. You will never be able to do that with China. So that's why United States start to put trade barriers and investment bans and all these kind of things.
Yeah.
And Europe was looking at that and saying, why they do that? Why do they step out of WTO? I mean, this
Mhm.
madness. And now they realize 10 years later that they should have done that. They should have done the same
Mhm.
because you cannot deal with China within the WTA framework. It doesn't work.
It's the people who are running the things in Brussels, they're not idiots. They knew what was going on, but they must have had some kind of things that were holding him back that
I think
you're not you're
let's be
not
frank.
convinced.
We didn't expect China to grow this fast, in particular in competences and
Mhm.
technology. Before the COVID, the new energy vehicle sector was very small, and it
Mhm.
wasn't even unclear that it would be able to really scale up. There was a lot of
Mhm.
new companies there. Nobody knew about them. And the general understanding in the auto sector is that it's very difficult to master automotive manufacturing, to integrate all things, to have competitive cars. It takes
Mhm.
time, in particular in
Mhm.
quality. So yes, low cost segment, entry range, they were already there. But to really be able to compete and actually to make better cars than Volkswagen or Daimler or
Mhm.
BMW, nobody expected that. And
Mhm.
there was the COVID. The COVID was like a fog. Nobody
Mhm.
saw, we stopped looking. We couldn't see what was going on. And after the COVID, the fog went away, and we realized that the full new sector, extremely advanced, very well organized, with a full supply chain, capable of exporting, rapidly scaling up export, was there.
Mhm.
And that, yeah, I agree. In Europe, there was an understanding that this was going to be a problem, but not so soon.
Hence the tariffs, the big tariff discussion. It was a
Yeah.
huge tariff discussion
Yeah,
in
it took 1 year and full inquiry to put small tariff on
yeah,
certain groups, only electric vehicles, no hybrids.
yeah.
Still, when it came to the council, so you have every state needs to vote through their prime ministers or presidents, and I think only 10 countries voted in favor of the tariffs, 12
Hmm.
abstained, and five, amongst which Germany, which was trying to block the tariffs, voted against. So even that was not consensual at all. And still,
Hmm.
you put tariff only on electric vehicles, so all the other vehicles
Yeah.
10% taxes, which is the base
Yeah.
rate of Europe, which is of course nothing, against 30, 40, 50% cost difference, it doesn't do much.
Yeah.
And then you have all the components which have no protection at all. And the battery, I think we have 1.8% taxes on batteries.
Mhm.
How can you structure your own industry when the most competitive one has free access to your market? So you see
Mhm.
there is a big delay between some European leaders, particularly Mario Draghi, who made a very good report about competitiveness in Europe. Uh, so these leaders have understood and have sent some alarms, but the time things set up and the fact that you need consensus to make things happen,
Mhm.
this makes things very difficult. So we're very late. So that's a big problem.
And the FDI story has been growing, right? The Chinese have been, it was this is kind of the okay, we screwed up on imports, but if we can get them to build and focus on pay for labor in and generate labor in EU, maybe we can make something happen worthwhile.
Yeah,
Yes,
but
no.
you need strong local content clauses. Otherwise, you have the famous screwdriver factories, or they can perhaps they stamp the cars and they weld the cars and they have a platform in place to assemble things, but all the things that are assembled come from China. And so you have factories that take market share from your OEMs, but also destroy the supply chain because the supply chain does not have any more a market because they do not buy European.
Hmm.
Um, so yes, and all the technology, all the R&D and so on. So it depends the size they get because they do not bring their R&D to Europe. They have no reason to do it, and so
Which
it's
is what they
critical.
demanded of the Europeans and the US when they came to China. You need
Yeah,
to set up R&D say, is as part of the of coming into the country.
yeah.
The Chinese were much stronger about setting up what you need to do to come here, and the EU has not been able to do that.
No, also because, as I say, that you don't have a central strong government that set the rules for all the others. So each country wants a piece of the cake, and so that's difficult to regulate.
Hmm.
Uh, Now many investment go to Spain. Spain is an important actor in the European Union, and so
Yeah.
Spain is, it doesn't want to have too many controls on FDIs, for instance, and it makes sense
Hmm.
for them
Hmm.
because they can attract a lot of them. So it's a tricky question about whether or not this FDI is a good thing. Also because one of the risks that is actually taking place is that we have FDI, but also we have OEMs that rather than developing their own new platform for electric vehicles, in particular for the entry range, they
Hmm.
buy the platform from Chinese companies. Or
Hmm.
they get the platform and they share with them. That
That's the
means that our
that's the
engineers
leap motor
that's Leap
example.
Motors. That's the new Twingo, which is the first entry range vehicle for Renault that will be the first of a new generation of vehicle that will be made on Chinese engineer platform,
Oh,
even if they're
really?
produced in Europe. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
So,
which company?
so the new
Where did they get?
Twingo
Which company did they get it from?
is not well, is not being disclosed. This is a kind of secret. I don't know. I don't think it's Dongfeng, even if Renault had a long-standing cooperation with Dongfeng. Actually, is going to make Dongfeng cars in their Ren factories.
Hmm. Hmm.
But this is happening, and also Volkswagen. That's with the Xpeng. It's the first time that they don't integrate Xpeng as a brand in their groups with the same platform, the same technology, all control in Wolfsburg. No. Xpeng is the platform for new electric cars. And so the Volkswagen cars will be made on a non-Volkswagen platform. And this is a completely new thing. And so if this keep going on and Europe does not protect itself in order to face this situation and build their own capacity in engineering, new
Hmm. Hmm.
platform to compete with the Chinese perhaps in 5, 10 years, about protecting now and then create this condition, then we will lose the capacity to learn. They will lose the capacity to compete. We will become more like brands or smaller groups, and the big Chinese groups will become bigger and more powerful. So I think this is extremely um, important that we do FDI screening. We force them to produce really locally. That will slow down a lot. If they have
Okay.
to make cars with European components and
Hmm.
to negotiate with European suppliers, that takes more time. It's more difficult, and so that will not allow them to take so much market share and so on. So slowing them down, creating strong condition for investment, forcing them to share technology and to make joint ventures, forcing them to not control this subsidiary or the company to have maximum 49% share as they did in
Yeah.
China. These are all
Yeah.
crucial
Yeah.
elements
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
Europe is not going to make to close the whole thing as United
Hmm.
States did. So we need to deal with their coming into Europe.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And if you don't do that, given also the difficulties of the European car makers right now, it can go very fast that you will find Chinese technology, parts, components, platform products all around the place.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
And Ford now connecting with Geely in,
yeah,
I think, in Spain. Is that
yeah,
Spain? Yeah.
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 It's
Yeah.
just one in the list. So you can see the car makers have already made their choice, which makes the whole things extremely difficult, which means that the car makers are lobbying against this. They're lobbying
Hmm.
against FDI screening, they're lobbying against made in Europe strong policies, they're lobbying against any type of protectionism, they even lobbying against industrial policies. They just want to have some aids, some tax rebates, but they don't want the state stepping in and playing a bigger role or setting up some barriers or keeping the Chinese out because they've already engaged in so many cooperation with them and they can
Yeah.
gain a
So,
lot from cheap components. And this has been a really debate at the colloquium. That was a central topic of discussion. What do you do? You made with China, or you made in Europe, and then you have to figure out how do you do without Chinese technology components and so on, which many European car makers are starting to depend on. You start to,
yeah.
you need
Yeah.
this in order to
Yeah.
be competitive. So
Yes.
it's not too late, I think, but it's really a crucial moment. Either we take the right direction, which I think is the Made in Europe one, is really making a new Green Deal and figuring out how to make this in Europe and be competitive. Otherwise, China will eaten up the European automotive industry
I mean,
eventually.
that includes the national companies of
Absolutely.
each of
Yeah.
they are putting themselves at risk of being being made small players or just a brand name
The
to
risk is
sell
real.
vehicles.
We are not there yet, but
No,
but
no,
these
no.
but these scenarios that like 5 years ago seem not possible, not even as a possible, just nobody was thinking about that.
Right,
Now you hear a lot of advisor experts and whatever saying careful, careful because Volvo, okay, was a small player, is already under the control of Geely, was before under the control of Ford. That's the kind of company that was already not anymore a national champion in the traditional way we
right,
talk about that.
right.
But now some people say the European part of Stellantis, the Volkswagen might eventually become target or willing to really be integrated in more and more kind of Chinese ecosystem of companies. Daimler has already, Geely as a big stakeholder of the company. So Renault has a lot of strategic cooperation with Geely
Hmm.
for all these. They have Horse, which is a division for the conventional powertrains.
Hmm.
And basically, this division is run by Geely. And
Mm.
they have Ampere, which is the electric part, which is
Right.
run by Renault is autonomous, but the traditional powertrain side is a joint venture with Geely, where Geely is more on the driving seat than Renault is. So this is already happening very
That's hard.
fast,
It's hard to believe, isn't it? It's hard to believe that how quickly it's changed.
very quickly. Now, I move to another topic that we've discussed a lot in at the colloquium is so what is happening in China? Okay, because in China we have this big players that are exporting a lot of cars, that are becoming dominant, that they're really dominant on their own domestic markets in terms of market share for electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids like BYD, but you also have Geely, of course, Chery. You have new players like Xiaomi, Huawei have stepped into the new energy vehicle market very successfully. You have smaller player, but still very successful, like Leap Motors, losing a
Hmm.
lot of money by capturing a lot of market share, and many
Hmm.
others, like NIO.
Hmm.
Uh,
Yeah.
Leap Motors is not losing a lot of money. So I said Leap Motors was a mistake. NIO, I was thinking about NIO. NIO is losing a lot of money, but is increasing its market share.
Hmm.
And all these actors are bigger than any in the new energy vehicle market. They're bigger than Toyota. They're bigger than Volkswagen. They're bigger than even than Tesla. Most of them. Tesla is a small player in this new energy vehicle market. So very successful. But at the same time, we have a big crisis of this market in 2026 that we've seen coming. The market is not growing fast enough. It's
Hmm.
actually shrinking a little bit. And this create huge pressure on profitability. Very few players are profitable.
Yes.
And
Yes.
we don't even know how many are really, really not profitable at all. It's kind of not easy to know, but we know that the margins are becoming thinner and more players are losing money. So what do we make of that? And that was a very interesting debate. So are we seeing a new model that will develop, but in which directions? Or are we in the middle of something that still need to be restructured massively to be viable one day? So it's like a rocket going, but we don't know where it's landing and if it's falling apart in its trajectories. Uh, that was a very interesting debate because very different views, well informed. I think we still lack empirical materials to be really to know really what we're talking about. Because
Hmm.
we have
Hmm.
some empirical materials, but to get the full pictures, we need more, and it's
Hmm.
not easy. So that was as a researcher team, I think we had a very interesting discussion about how do we characterize that? Is it viable? What will happen in the next 5, 10 years? Nobody knows. Can go
Hmm.
in many different directions. How Western players will survive in
Right.
these
Right.
it will survive because they're more solid, or they will be wiped away because the competition is such that they're not competitive. And so
Yeah.
perhaps they're more solid, they're not losing as much money as the others, but they're losing market shares every step of the way. Or they will be able to. So a lot of discussion about that, more and more presentation about Chinese companies, Chinese business models, Chinese ecosystem of innovation. So a lot of Chinese streams in the colloquium
Right.
with this interesting debate because it's not clear for us.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
um, it's big, it's happening, it's fast, it's very competitive. All the value chain is there, it's huge. They have economy of scale, they can make cars very quickly, they have good products. So all of these are plus. But at the same time,
Mhm.
many actors are losing money, too many actors in the market. Um, Unclear who will survive, unclear how much this is sustainable. And export are developing fast to
Yeah.
compensate for that. But
Yes.
if Europe blocks them and other big market decide to put some brakes into that, what will happen? Because if there is no export, then it's eating up, and you cannot get the eat out, and eventually you will have a restructure. So it could even collapse. Who knows? There are many companies that could collapse one day from another. Of course,
Gosh, we always expected this collapse. We've been talking about the collapse, I think, since the turn of the century, where the where they had over 200 vehicle makers that were making ICE vehicles,
yeah.
and then they added the new energy vehicles, so there was even more companies. We and it hasn't. Really haven't seen it. And our colleague Mike Snitka, who's done a nice job about keeping track of companies
Yeah,
that are
very nice presentation by Mike. Yeah, absolutely.
selling very small numbers of vehicles that, and then some that quit. There's nothing that says, oh, they're out of business, but they're selling zero vehicles.
Okay, but,
And
but that means that there's been some restructuring, and you've seen some structuring of the market. So you have some few big players that are there year after year, but
yeah,
you have also new entry, and this is disturbing. A company like Xiaomi that
yeah,
comes 2 years ago and doesn't make his own car. I think it's Chang'an who's making the car for them,
mm,
and actually takes 6% of the market.
mhm,
that's something that is difficult to understand in a market that is so competitive. And so
Yeah. Yeah.
how is this possible? How does
Mhm.
it work? And BYD, that seems like the big leader, now is losing 50% of sales by comparison of last year's. Is down so much.
Oh, really?
Yeah, something like 46% in the first 6 months compared to 2025. You wouldn't expect that. You wouldn't expect that in such competition, the biggest player, first mover, would be ahead of competitors.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
no, yes, put out too many models. Perhaps the economy scales are not really there. Who knows? They try to be
And the competition
profitable.
and the competition is fierce.
Yeah, and so something went wrong, and the competition is fierce. So it's we are still, we had these plenary session about the Chinese model. And I say that as a researcher, we're good to look at things that are relatively cold. When they're stabilized, we look at things, data makes sense. We have all these parameters. But when things are so hot, moving fast, changing dimensions and shapes so quickly, we're not good at that because simply we don't have the time to figure out what matters, what's not matter,
Yeah.
what are the factors that really make player better than the others. There are constantly new stories that contradicts what you have learned in the previous one, and so I think
And we end up focusing on scenarios.
yeah, but it's also difficult
This
to
might happen. This might happen.
yeah.
If this happens, then this might happen.
No,
And because we don't have enough data to actually know exactly how things are going to play out.
but you really need a lot to that because most of the time science is about reducing very complex objects to some factors that really make sense by comparison to others. So you have explanation that work. Lean production was about that. You say, okay, Japanese, why they're so competitive, and then you have a concept, data, the factory inquiries, and then it made sense. You can isolate some factors that really made the difference between a Japanese company and another, and
And the
explain that
Japanese were very open.
they were willing to share that in order to be welcome our good employer and say
Yeah.
it's not bad working condition, it's not that we have subsidized, we're not
Yeah.
it's not it's because we are more competitive on this and this. And but for this you need things to be stabilized, you need access, you need long-term research,
Yeah.
4 or 5 years research program in order to figuring out that, and you have to look at many different things and then say, okay, this is the one that really makes the difference.
Right.
And here we have no access or few access, so and things are moving so fast. So it's very difficult to isolate which factors are important. Some people say the speed. They
Yes.
make cars every one
Yes.
year.
Yeah.
But then
Yeah.
you realize that the market is going down by 50%. So you say that might means that what they put into the market is not what the consumer really wanted. Perhaps
Mm.
not at the price they wanted, or
Yeah. Yeah.
something wrong.
Yeah.
So the speed eventually, when you eat a wall like that, that speed doesn't help you because that costs you money
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
marketing
Yeah.
and to just to come up with the new and creates a competition where nobody is sustainable. So perhaps it's not speed, perhaps it's something else. So is their capacity of there's been a lot of discussion about their capacity of integrating um, all the digital part of the car
Yes.
through
Yes.
a more open platform with more cooperation and doing that in a smoother way, faster than Western OEMs. They want to control everything, to close the architecture, and that doesn't seem to work for software-defined vehicles. While the Chinese
Yeah.
keep more open, they have more open ecosystem. Also, the expert
Sometimes that's because of their connections to the IT industry. Xiaomi, for example, with their cell phone industry, they're
exactly.
turn as you know, cell phones are turning over every year, and that kind of speed internally. So I think there are some researchers in China who are discussing that as one of the effects, things that are affecting the Chinese automakers that are willing to accept this new way of doing things.
Yeah.
Which as you said, the older companies, the U.S. companies, the European companies, they go, no, it takes time to do this stuff, and they go, no, it doesn't really. You don't need to, and what ends up happening in the marketplace? What happens to those vehicles? Do they last? Do they
Mm.
have massive recalls because of things, or do they not? Or they actually do okay?
Yeah, apparently
That's
they're doing okay. Apparently they're doing
that's the
okay.
kind of stuff. That's the kind of data that we still need to capture
We
in China.
start to have some early data, early return. There are some Chinese vehicles that have been sold in Norway, for instance, or in France and Germany,
Yeah,
MG vehicles, or even Tesla made in China, which is a Chinese vehicle.
yeah,
But MG vehicles we had a lot. Then we start to have some Geely vehicles and so on. And in the first 2 years, there are inquiries from the dealers to know
yeah,
how many of these cars had problems during the first 2 years. And actually, the Chinese cars are doing pretty well,
yeah,
according to the dealers who sell them.
yeah, yeah,
This is what is surprised us, is because we knew that Chinese had more open architecture for
yeah,
their cars, which also was needed because they started using components and platform from other players. So it was like Frankenstein cars. So you aggregate things
yeah, yeah,
and you look for the cheapest, create an interface, and then you create these cars that has some Corolla in it, some Volkswagen Golf, some whatever, and then these were
yeah,
the first Chinese model that we saw. And so from that, they kept this more open architecture, more modular. And that was also Taka Fujimoto, who is a very important researcher in our network, who was there in Paris, has been really talking a lot about that. But according to the Fujimoto model of research, cars are by definition integral products because in order to perform, this is not a computer. It can be a computer on wheels, but still need to be run at 150 or miles, I don't know, 100 miles per hour. It need to be to keep the road. It need to be very performant in terms of how the architecture works. And so Fujimoto tend to say modular cars will have quality problems, will not be performant, will be cheaper, but will
mhm,
not be as performant as integral products. And that's why I tend to give an advantage to traditional OEMs
mhm,
because he expected the cars to remain very much integral products, even as an electric cars
mm,
because he has to move in such a conditions of speed or heat or whatever, in which with the integral architecture controlled by the architecture relatively close, perform better. Okay,
mhm.
and actually we see that Chinese cars are doing pretty well, much better than we expect. So they seem to have the advantage of relatively open modular architecture to drive down costs, move fast, integrate new technologies, and so on,
Right.
and yet the products perform pretty close or even better than you would call, competitive, more integral products. And
Hmm.
that is the
Hmm.
surprise. That's the
Yeah.
surprise that what we need to understand how they have managed to combine more modular open architecture of the products with all the advantages that these give in terms of reducing costs, moving fast, using an open ecosystem, uh, but still obtaining cars that are really competitive in terms of how they perform on
Yeah.
the road. How
Right.
they're, how do you drive them? How do you feel them? These kind of
Right.
things.
Right.
And then that means that, German brands lose all their competitive advantage because the competitive
Mhm.
advantage was the engine. Oh, this is gone in many of these electric cars. And then, the driving feeling, the feeling of the cars. You said this
Yeah.
is a German car. You feel that when you drive is different, and that
Yeah.
it behave in a certain way. If 20, 50, $40,000 cheaper cars have more features and behave in more or less in the same way, then the German are dead. And then
Yeah.
we have a mystery. Our Chinese have been able to do that so fast and so effectively. So this is the discussion we had about the Chinese model to understand that objectively, not we don't know how this story will end, or will survive, or will die, but they
Hmm.
still managed to make products that we didn't expect them to be able to do so quickly and so efficiently. So
Yeah.
you have to give credit to them for that.
Yeah.
Their products are outstanding
Yeah.
and much. So this is still something that we need to figure out more in detail. But the
Sure.
colloquium was a good place to discuss that. All these topics were on the table. Then I will add a little bit on the topic of the conference that we're not talking about, but there is reason for that. So we decide to put the focus on something that is still very small in our network, which is circular economy.
Hmm.
Because this is also something that is going to be bigger and bigger. There are rules, policies, regulation that will ask car makers to be more and more circular. And also, car makers are looking at these as new businesses. Since they're selling less new cars, there are more second-hand cars in the market. So remanufacturing things, repairing things, uh, um, making of the second-hand market like a new a base new market, in which you take second-hand cars, but then you rearrange them, you give a new guarantee to that, and you
Yeah,
put into the
yeah.
market as new cars, and you start to industrialize that, and then also the big topic of how you repair batteries, how you recycle them, and what
Hmm.
this will mean in terms of industry development. So this
Hmm.
is a new topic for us. We have an ongoing project as GERPISA because we also have research project and funding separate from the network, where
Hmm.
we have teams of researchers that we coordinate. So we have one research going on in France on that, and we decided to make a focus of the colloquium into that more as a kind of bet to see, what can we get out of that. And we had some interesting sessions about that.
Hmm.
So they're relatively small, I would say 3, 4 sessions about
Hmm.
second-hand markets, about repairing cars, and how this is in more professionally, but also by people simply. They have owner of very old cars,
Hmm.
and they have their own practices of repairing, and there are more sophisticated cars that are coming to the market, and
Hmm.
eventually will be very old cars.
Yeah.
Will these people still be able to repair them? And in France, we had the Yellow Jacket movement. There was a protest against high price of fuel, but was more also a protest against the policies that do not consider and respect all this huge car fleet of old cars that
Hmm.
play a crucial role in the
Yeah.
mobility of people everywhere in the world. Most of the
Right.
focus on our network is new cars, new
Yeah.
technologies,
Yeah. Yeah.
autonomous driving.
Yeah.
But 90% of the people drive cars that are older than 5 years old, and and
Right.
and
Right.
and half of the population in France perhaps older than 10 years old. So
Yeah.
so to study these and to understand how this world will evolve with the new products and what we need to do so that the new products will not become impossible to repair or impossible to be taken care of in
Right.
the future, I think is a political questions in the sense that if we don't take care of this question now, politically and through regulations, it will become a political bomb in 10 years, 15 years. So that
Hmm.
was some interesting, small conversation we had about the circular economy, but also about all these dichotomy of new cars moving very fast into more and more technological advanced products, and a car fleet that doesn't really fall up. So we see that the age of the car fleet in Europe is growing, growing,
Yeah.
growing.
Yeah. Here too.
And new cars relatively to the car fleet are becoming smaller and smaller and smaller. And this eventually will create big social, economic, and technological fractures inside the
Hmm.
society. So we start to discuss that. I think we had some good presentation and good discussion about that.
Including my colleague Carrie Alkire, who
Of
talked
course,
about the EV circular value chain, about
absolutely.
how the different how the companies are, well, and this was before the current administration, but how they have. She was tracking what was doing each of the companies were doing in terms of in different parts of that value chain, including recycling and where getting doing battery processing and where are they getting their materials and things like that. And her update this year had to do with I think she had 2 or 3 companies, Ford and General Motors. What had happened to the ones that to all these deals and companies that they had set up during the Biden administration,
Uh-huh.
and how that has changed. And what you've seen, and not a lot of it had changed yet. that
I think
that
I think it's clear also in United States that eventually you will go more and more electric. Is you cannot really stop this transition. I believe. Then I know that it's still a political debate, but I think that is even in United States you can see that this is still happening despite winds that are against, but there is still happening. Yeah, yeah, and also we visit a very interesting place. After the colloquium, we went to end-of-life vehicle center,
right,
but a very
right,
modern one, which is organized with a lot of digital technologies and algorithms that learn what has value inside the cars, and
right.
so it tells the workers what they need to extract from a car that has a value, and that what is extracted is rapidly checked if it's operational, and then they make photography of that with 3D cameras, and then they
It's
put in
fascinating.
Amazon kind
It
of
was fascinating.
warehouse, and
Yeah,
it's distributed all around France. And these kind of companies are new and are creating new markets for that. And also we visit their new atelier for repairing batteries that have been not yet set up. It was still a work in process, and explain us how, first of all, that from a regulatory perspective is very difficult. You need a lot of things in order to be accepted. You need to store these batteries with some safety
yeah,
conditions. Then
yeah,
you need a specific swimple in order to, if a battery takes fire, you need to put the battery inside this
yeah,
wimple,
yeah,
and so on. And then you need to figure out ways of repairing that, and then you need to figure out ways to certify that they're repairing in a way that consumers can buy and guarantees that, and so on. So it's fascinating, fascinating discussion. Yeah.
yes, it was. It was very good. We really enjoyed that piece. Uh, was so different from the the scrappage yard that we went to in Japan.
Yeah, yeah, very different. A new generation. And also the people there, they were, very high quality managers with
Yeah,
strong background in technology, figuring out a lot of new solutions, using a lot of also artificial intelligence and algorithms, in
mm,
this. It also was very interesting because they created a line to disassemble the vehicle. And so we are used to, and the same day we visit the line that creates a vehicle. So
right,
so we see the old things. You have a line where you put the platform, and then you put parts, and then the final car gets out, and then at the end of this life, then the vehicle gets into a line where it's disassembled. And
right,
they actually, before that was done, as I said, in a very not standardized,
right,
not efficient way. And
right,
here you have a full line with fixed station in which there are, the work is different, the time is very long. Workers need to figure it out for each car how to do that. There are different
right.
processes. So it's very interesting that the work is very different. Uh,
Yes,
Cars
yeah,
assemble in, well, there you have more line, they're more flexible today, but very standardized jobs with short time cycle. Here the work is different and more creative.
across
And
all brands,
yeah, they're
across
all
all
brand,
brands.
all size, everything, and and
Yeah,
and
yeah,
but they're setting up procedures and standards to make these more efficient and to
yeah,
extract more value faster in a more efficient way. And this create new market because all the parts that get out of these vehicles are incredibly cheaper thanks to these
yeah,
organic. They're available very fast, and they're incredibly cheaper than the standardized one. And that
yeah,
creates a lot of opportunity to extend the life of vehicles. So we go
right.
back to this is part of the circular economy because this creates all the parts that are needed to take care of all vehicles at reasonable price. They also
Mhm.
take out full engine from the cars, and they
Right,
check if the engines are running fine, and then they clean it, and the full engine are available for being to replace a engine in similar cars. Normally, when an engine is dead, the car is dead. There you can even replace that. So I
right.
think it was very interesting to. So you have a strange future in which you have more and more advanced cars, but also you have the opportunity to keep very old cars running for even longer. So this
So,
is a new topic that is being injected in the conference, and we
mhm.
hope it will grow in the next colloquium.
Now, one topic that was not discussed much, and one that is much near and dear to your heart because you've spent so much time working on it, and it has to do with labor.
Mm. To me,
working.
labor is a question that needs to to advance in the sense that there are a lot of researchers that use the same framework as before, which is you go into the factory, you look at labor conditions. Most of the time, you find that labor conditions are not getting much better. I think United States has been kind of an exception because UAW has been so successful suddenly after decades of difficulties. So
Hmm.
that's a big news for labor. And also you had the USMCA, which has introduced labor clause for
Yep.
Mexico. So I think United States
Yep.
is an interesting place in which these questions have found new life. But in Europe, I think that we are in the process in which we need to figure out how do we reframe the question of labor because we produce less cars. There is been a lot of relocation of production all around the place, so workforce are more dispersed. Trade unions tend to be weaker and weaker rather than stronger and stronger.
Hmm.
And there is so many threats, and the trade unions tend to be really on the sun because the market is not protected. Chinese are getting in, nothing is stabilized. The electric transition is very fast. So all these create a condition in which employer says, it's not us. We are under such a pressure, so you need to make concession, concession, concession. We need to cut jobs, we need to close factories, and so on.
Hmm.
This is kind of moving very fast with really little resistance. So we had interesting presentation that documented that this is going on, that
Hmm.
the electric transition has been rather a tool to not make a just transition, but rather pushing even further uh, uh, work regimes that are more demanding, more flexible, with lower values, lower
Hmm.
wages for
Hmm.
workers, and so on. So this has been documented, but how do we make out of that, and how do we help trade unions and working organizations to figure out condition under which the progress of the automotive industry is also progress for workers and their working condition. I think what was very good in the IRA made by Biden, it made very clear that you need to connect the green transition, electrification, with the labor questions. Otherwise, it's not accepted.
Hmm.
Otherwise, it would be rejected.
Hmm.
And if you want to be ahead to make this transition because you need it for the climate, but also because it's required to not be on the back of the technological transformations, you need to make it socially acceptable. And this was, I think, very interesting, the IRA, I think. And in Europe, we didn't have really this discussion. We have this concept of just transition, but it's pretty empty, is a slogan.
Hmm.
And trade unions are, they they are struggling to figuring out a way to put this question at the core of the debate. So I guess that's my takeaways, that we are in a position in which we need, as a researcher, in particular those who are active in labor studies,
Hmm.
um, to update some of their concept and tools in order to figuring out how to to place this question at the core of the debate, because eventually uh, I'm not saying this question is not important anymore, but
Hmm.
if it's not taken care of, then politically the condition of social acceptability of electrification fall apart. And
Hmm.
what we see, in factories that make electric cars, workers do not have electric cars, and if they ask, they say, "I would rather prefer to produce ICE cars." That's the kind of feeling you have at the shop floor
Hmm.
level.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I think this is so we did have interesting discussion, in particular about the battery industry, on the
Hmm.
fact that Europe is letting an industry with very bad working and employment condition, has not made an effort to regulate that. And
Hmm.
since this factory is established in territories with low union density or no union at all, this is happening in Europe, and we're not dealing with that. And this
Hmm.
is a problem. And even in Northvolt, there was a study that showed that labor and employment conditions were pretty bad in Sweden, and trade
Hmm.
unions were not really recognized. So these are companies that are also trying to avoid these as a constraint, like Tesla did in the United States.
Hmm.
And this is not creating the kind of employment conditions that are favorable to develop new businesses, because If working conditions are bad, then you have turnover, then you have accidents. That's not
Hmm.
good.
Hmm.
So these things were, and I think Lorenza Monaco and Alex Covarrubias presented a new project about this twin transition and just transition paradigm.
Hmm.
And so with the ambitions of kind of a global view about this and say, okay, we have this slogan. So what is actually happening? How do we make of that? How trade unions have used these tools and so I think this stream is in the process of renewal, new research questions, new objects, the battery industry, in a context that is difficult. I
Hmm.
think, with the only exception of United States, where the UAW in a context very much protected. The United States have insulated themselves from Chinese competition and
Right.
have very much slowed down the electric transition now.
For the
And
moment.
and was not very fast even before by
Yeah.
comparison. So
Yeah.
so these have created an environment in which perhaps the UAW had an opportunity with the rebound of the market after the COVID, but also I must say there are a lot of interesting research about UAW that shows that they've been very smart about negotiating, about targeting new population, young workers, and so on. So
Hmm.
I think
Hmm.
that there was some attention about that. But in the rest of the world, you cannot say labor is winning anywhere. It's
Hmm.
rather losing. In China, you don't see a lot of progress. We had some work by Boy Luce about the fact that in companies like BYD or Seattle, they really employ a lot of migrant workers, including engineers,
Hmm.
and they actually bringing down the average level of wages and benefits by comparison with older joint ventures like Volkswagen
Hmm.
or
Hmm.
or or General Motors. They had
Yeah.
much better, and they still have much better employment conditions, but they're losing market share. So the winners are those who are in the cluster, in the regional governments, where you have the most of migrant workers and the lowest level of wages and the worst employment conditions. So even in China, you cannot say that the best employers are those who are actually winning the race.
Hmm. Hmm.
Uh, so, so the stream is there, but it's true. I do not take clear takeaway apart from the fact that there is a crisis. That concept like just transition is not working. That the
Hmm.
transition are rather unjust, not
Hmm.
just. They're rather contributing and make work harder or less interesting, to reduce the level of employment, to reduce wages and benefits in this new industry. So this is a stream that it remains important, but I think is looking at a new way to come up with the positive kind of impact in terms of what the research can say about how do we promote a just transition, what are the conditions, what are the cases in which actually it work, how trade unions can have an impact, a role in shaping this new paradigm
Hmm.
of the
Hmm.
automotive. So I think that is a stream that is working in progress.
Now, when you look at for your particular research, Tommaso, what are you working on right now?
I've been very actively working on the Industrial Accelerator Act. I've
Hmm.
made two reports on Made in Europe. First, I made a work about comparing all local content policies around the world to see how Europe fare by comparison with
Yeah.
the other countries. And I've shown that actually everywhere else you have local content policies of different types connected with different industrial policies, but actually Europe is really the exception in this
Hmm.
landscape. And this has really accelerated during and after the COVID
Hmm.
because of the all the topic of de-risking, decoupling, in
Hmm.
particular towards China, reducing strategic dependencies, and you do this a lot with local content policies.
Yeah.
And then I've been looking into the European industry, the crisis, understanding the nature of the crisis, and I think it's important to have in mind that actually, if you look at the profits and if you look at uh, financial reserve or European OEMs have been doing extremely well in the last 10 years, I would say. In
Hmm.
particular, 2021, 22, 23, they made extraordinary profits, much
Hmm.
higher than anybody else, much higher than American companies, Korean, Japanese, and much, much higher than Chinese. They've not invested. They've retained these earnings. They've distributed a little bit to shareholders, but
Hmm.
they've not used these financial reserves to make things, to invest in new technology. And this is a part of the crisis, of the companies that are maximizing their profits and their shareholder value rather than trying to create new products or develop new technologies. They've been very hesitant to do that. I'm not saying they've
Hmm.
not invested at all, but they're invested less than they did before, and they've retained much more of their earnings as financial reserves or distributing as a shareholder value. And this is part of the crisis. And now they can use that to buy cheap Chinese technology. I go back to the EA Industrial Accelerator debate. And that will cost less to them than to really invest, you know?
Hmm.
Do I
Hmm.
create a new platform for cheap electric cars, or do I buy the platform that exists already from a Chinese company? What is cheaper?
Right.
Cheaper to buy, and
Yeah.
also comes with cheaper components, and so on. So these two things, understanding where the crisis is coming from, and also how much is endogenous to the industry, and
Hmm.
also how do we need to protect from Chinese trade expansions. I've been working a lot on the regulations, on how to implement that. I've been working with stakeholders, with automotive suppliers on these topics,
Hmm.
together with the European Commission or the French government to provide expertise. So what is the level of local content in Europe? How do you calculate that?
Hmm.
What can we learn from all the local content requirements around the world? How do you implement them and so on?
Hmm.
um, is that if you put made in Europe policies, but you don't change the way European OEMs are behaving, that will not work. So you need to make protection because it's needed, but at the same time, you need to set up a kind of industrial policy that force OEMs under good condition with some public supplies to invest, to make
Hmm.
effort, to create products, to bring products to factories, to bring down also the cost of the cars.
Hmm.
They're too expensive. You know, all these profits have been generated also by a high margin or cars that are overpriced or overpowered or too big for the European
Hmm.
market. So I think these two things go together. So I'm working on these two things. I've been working a lot on these small electric vehicles. How do you make it? What are the conditions? You need to create a new category for this vehicle. How do the Japanese car makers produce these, the K cars? So I went to Japan and made some field work about Honda factories that make this kind of products. And
Hmm.
I've learned that actually, yeah, it is very much optimized for very
Hmm.
small vehicles and very much share between many brands. And so
Hmm.
you need innovation, you need industrial policies, and you need protection all together. And so
Hmm.
these kind of things I've been working on and not really as I would say researcher. So with a lot of with field work, and I've been thinking about the Chinese models, but
Yeah.
mostly through literature. I mean, I try to have access to as much as data about the market,
Secondary,
about the evolution as
secondary,
possible.
secondary research.
Secondary
Yeah. So,
research,
yeah.
looking at what Chinese are saying about that, get in
Yeah.
touch with people that are writing books about that, try to
Yeah.
coordinate a working group with GERPISA to move this question forward. So we haven't received yet the fundings and we haven't a program to go. You know, I would like to have some field works in China to, but you need
Yeah.
to organize that. So I'm really in the phase of thinking how to organize that and also as a preliminary work to provide a sort of literature review, but at the same time with some theoretical thinking in terms of how do you frame these Chinese models? What do we know can tell us about that? So
Yeah.
these are the areas of my research right now.
Last question for you. One of the things that we've been tracking is the EU and their emissions policies, and
Mm-hmm.
and what is leading to um, the most recent thing I thought I've seen is, oh, it's not that you're going to have all vehicles are going to have to be electric by 2035 or zero emissions
Yeah.
by 2035, but 90% are going to have to be. Uh,
It's not exactly like that. They're saying
where are we on that?
you need to reduce by 90% the emissions of the average emissions by comparison with 2021. So that does not necessarily is equal to 90% electric vehicles,
Ah,
uh, because you can have vehicles that can run on carbon-free fuel, and since we're measuring CO2, from what gets out of the car. So an internal combustion engine which runs with the carbon-free fuel, that would be zero emission as well. So, and anyway, the average must be 90% lower. So that creates a lot of confusion actually. So what
oh
is
yeah, it
so what
certainly
is
does.
happening in Europe is that we had a change. We had an European election, and the new parliament is much less favorable to the Green Deal.
Ah,
Also, the core of the European Parliament, which is the group of the center right, the traditional right,
yeah,
has shifted its position about the electric vehicle, Germany in particular. It wants to bring back as much as possible and for longer time than it was previously expected, internal combustion cars.
okay.
Because the industry is going bad, and the car makers have blamed electrification as one of the cause of the problem. And
Mm,
so car makers have been lobbying for that because there are penalties that are associated with CO2. And in my view, they've been bad in their product policies. They make cars, electric cars, that are too big, too expensive, and they're not really made the efforts to make cheaper and lighter and more efficient electric cars. But they blame that on the market, the consumer. It's not
mm,
our fault. And they're actually not really killing, but they're really trying to slowing down the transition, which I believe
mm,
is against their own interest. Because what my view, a smarter way of doing that is we need more support from the state. We need more subsidized. We need rules that are more clever, intelligent to make cars that are cheaper and more efficient. And then under this condition, we keep the targets. They rather,
mm,
say, no, let's make the target lighter now, because they're making money on ICE cars, okay?
mm,
So more
mm,
than with electric cars. So they're looking at short terms, but that slow down the transition. Those car makers that made the investment, they will not have the return on investment on the electric
mm,
platform that we're expecting. And the supply chain also, the players that have you know make the effort to be ready, but the market is not there, not at the volume that actually make them survive. So that creates a condition in which all the scenarios we had before of fast electrification are not happening. Electrification is still growing, but not as
mm,
fast as before. And then the business conditions and the new products and the type of investments that get slowed down, or even stopped. You've
mm,
seen the reset by Stellantis. They're actually putting dozens of billions of dollars to scale down their investment in electrification. To me, it's madness. This,
mm,
is really short term versus long term.
right.
And so right now, nevertheless, things have not changed so much. So basically, you have slowed down a little bit the transition, but still the movement is still massively towards electrification.
Mm,
The problem is that since they've done once, and so to say, well, we need to scale down. We
yeah,
need to delay. We need
yeah,
flexibility. Since they've
right.
done once, and they've successfully argued that this is because the market is not following up.
Mm,
This creates a condition under which in 5 years they will do it again.
yeah,
Look, the market is not following up because
yeah.
these, chicken and egg problem. So if you have the target and you know that they are binding, then you make the investment. Then the
Mhm,
products are there. Then you sell the products, and then it goes. But if you start to realize that they're not binding and they can be very much more flexible than you expect, then you don't make the investments, and then the
mhm,
products are not there, and so on. And
right.
so I think the big danger right now is that in the name of short-term profitabilities and easier way of doing that, they might eventually this might eventually lead to not killing but weakening a lot the momentum for electrification, in which
Mhm,
Europe could have caught up with China.
yeah, yeah.
and a lot of investment made will not pay off, and a lot of companies that made an effort uh, will not be able to survive. This dynamic is very dangerous. So right now, the cafe rules have not changed so much. Okay, they've obtained something that slowed down the transition, but still
Hmm.
2030 will be a big hurdle. So they have to really increase the share of electric vehicles by 2030, and this is connected with the Chinese, because
Hmm.
if you do with Chinese products, or you let Chinese in, and then you make you can regroup yourself for cafe. You
Hmm.
can create not cluster, but you can
A
group. You can,
group. Yeah.
yeah, and so it's the average emission that
Yeah.
counts.
Yeah.
So they can do that with Chinese brands, and they can use Chinese products to increase sales
Yeah.
of cheap electric vehicles. So you see, the cafe is connected with the Industrial Accelerator Act and the Made in Europe, and you need to make the two things right. If, in my view, uh, you want to have a chance to save the European automotive industry as a big, competitive, full autonomous industry in the next 10 years.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and the two are connected. And I believe that ambitious CAFE is needed and ambitious EAA is needed together to force OEMs to play the game.
Yeah.
Because right now, short term, OEMs are tempted to keep sales as long as possible because they're most profitable, and to use as much as possible Chinese technology to meet these targets. And
Hmm.
if you let this happen, short term, they will be fine. That will have a huge impact on the supply chain in Europe. Long term, everybody will be dead.
No, on that optimistic note.
No, but as I say, that's why policies in the political arena now is so important in Europe.
Yeah.
Is crucial. It,
Yeah.
it, it will the direction we will take will depend very much in the next 2 years, and the type of regulation we set for battery, for
Hmm.
made in Europe, for
Hmm.
cafe, for the small electric car initiatives. There's new category that might be created. All these kind of things are extremely important, and so it's fascinating.
Yeah.
That's why the colloquium is so exciting these years, because we
Yeah.
have so much
Yeah.
to debate, and the stakeholders come with a lot of different views. They clash in public on these topics, and that's also a lot of fun. We can
And we're
see it.
looking forward to next year's
Next
colloquium
year,
in Venice.
Venice.
Yeah.
Venice, yeah. Venice,
Yes.
same dates, more or less, 15 to 27 of June,
Okay.
2027.
Yeah. Looking forward to it. All right,
Good.
Tommaso, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.